We will be taking questions in a few minutes, so if anyone wants to line up. The next question is for Danny, and maybe with Alon and David responding. I assume most of you are aware of the 60 Minutes show last Sunday on Christians in the Holy Land. I wanted to ask you, Danny, how do you feel that Israel should have responded? Did Ambassador Oren do the right thing by going to CBS and, I guess, interfering in the show? Or should we have waited and responded afterwards?
You have to bear with me because I'm not hooked up. That's what happens when you're a little late for the events here, so I apologize. I hope you can hear me. I'm certainly... You can't. I'll speak up even out louder. I don't think... I don't have one. I'll get there. Anyway.
Here's a microphone. Thanks to Larry Weinberg.
There are often questions you ask yourself. Should we respond before? Should we respond after? Should we do it quietly? There are reasons for each direction of doing it. We were aware of this film, or the intent of 60 Minutes a few months ago. I don't know what to tell you. Should have waited afterwards. I know that it did achieve the effect that we wanted, that they did tone it down a bit, at least to what we knew what was the original intent. And usually, if you keep things silent, it comes out much worse. And I agree with Malcolm on this. And by the way, our ministry works very closely with Malcolm on a lot of the projects.
Absolutely.
We've taken up the challenges that he's presented to the State of Israel, and we're very happy with the cooperation. And it's precisely that we don't sit and wait for things to happen, but take the initiative. Now, sometimes the initiative will draw attention to the story. But my experience in the 30 years working on behalf of Israel is that it's usually, if you do take the initiative, it makes the other side think about what they're doing. It makes them tone things down, because you can always get away with stuff if nobody says anything. And then you're chasing after it. And one of the criticisms about Israel has been, all the years, is that we're constantly responding and reacting and not initiating. So now we're changing that. So there will be those who will criticize the ambassador. I personally can't do that because Mike and I serve together in the paratroopers, so I will never say a bad word about Mike. But in this particular instance, I think Mike did the right thing. I think the State of Israel responded correctly, and we should always take the initiative.
Alon, would you like to respond to that, and also to the issue of the government decision to declare German poet Günter Grass persona non grata for his...
Why is that an important issue?
Well, because it's also the Israeli government making a stand about something.
It's not an important issue. Look,
okay,
I'm not going to go into a monologue like everyone else. I agree with everything that's been said here. A bunch of Jews kvetching, whining, and complaining about the media to even bigger bunch of Jews is something that I'm used to. It's what we do. It's a state of mind. It's what we're good at. The question is, what's in it for us? Okay, for 64 years, we've been on the defensive. Everything that you've heard here was on the defensive. I don't need to explain except for some of the things that some of the projects that Malcolm enumerated, but forget the specifics. We're always defensive. We need to justify our existence. Since when is Israel less of a country than Belgium? Israel is more of a country than Canada. Did anyone ever question Canada's right to exist? But Jews are fixated and obsessed and paranoid about the issue of our right to exist. Now, why am I saying this? Because when you play defense, you invite attacks. And I'm not getting into the analysis of the attacks. Are they anti-Semitic? Are they borderline legitimate? Are they not? I commend Alan Dershowitz for having the time, the energy, and the patience to read garbage like Gilad Atzmon's book. I got like 150 books that I have to read. That's not one of them. So you know. The point is, David, the point is that, what's the original question? Is it about the media or our enemies? And why am I saying this? 1.3 billion Chinese do not hate you, plus 1.2 billion Indians, plus 310 million Americans, plus 125 million Japanese, plus 120 million Mexicans, plus 85 million 160 million Nigerians, and on and on. Half of the 7 billion people on this earth do not hate Israel, but they don't give a damn about Israel because it's an issue of the news. Now, we've been fortunate and maybe privileged for a long time to beg to be on the front page of the New York Times and get there. Then one day it all changed. We're now begging to be off the page one of the New York Times. And I'm not casting judgment on the Times or CNN. I'm just saying we've become normal. I'm not belittling the issue of anti-Semitism, of delegitimization, of media bias. It's all true. The question is, have we become normal enough to deal with it in a normal way, or are we going to forever whine and complain about everyone's against us, because that is not, that is not an effective weapon. The effective weapons, amongst other things, are what Malcolm described. Some of it has to do with bias, with anti-Semitism, yes, with criticism, legitimate or not. Some of it is, some of it is completely out of order. We should call out the out of order, but not in a panicky way. We always seem to be panicking when dealing with the media. We'll boycott the New York Times. We'll shut down CNN. I mean, Israelis are still obsessed with an editorial in a silly, insignificant non-entity of a newspaper in Denmark. We're still Eurocentric. When was the last time that there was an anti-Israeli article in India or China? Those are pretty big countries too, at least as big as Norway. And every time there's an idiotic comment in a Norwegian or the BBC, you know, I love England, I love Ron, we've both been on the BBC 100 times. Who cares what the BBC said? I'm not saying shut up, I'm not saying ignore, I'm not saying dismiss, but stop with this irrational fixation. Oh my God, did you hear what they said on the BBC? So what? So what? We $30,000 GDP per capita, 11 Nobel laureates, 5 spy satellites, according to Jane's Defense Weekly, 200 nuclear weapons. Who cares what the BBC said?
So we're in good shape. Okay.
So they say.
David, this question. I read an article about an American Jewish effort to create a toolbox of political advocacy, like for American Jews to use to combat delegitimization efforts, like contacting elected officials, calling into talk show radio hosts. Do you think that's an effective way to fight this battle, to defend Israel?
Well, I'm going to do something very non-Jewish. I'm going to agree with my Jewish panelist, which no, I shouldn't do, but I live in Hollywood. I spent 25 years in the advertising business. And the first commandment in our business is thou shalt not bore. And of everything that I heard right now, I think one of the issues right now in terms of Israel PR is a lot of our arguments have been repeated over and over again, and we seem to go over people's head, regardless of whether we're right or not. My suggestion for today is to go radical, to go extreme, to surprise, and to shock the world. In the same way that Ambassador Prosser mentioned that our enemies are crossing red lines, Alan Dershowitz spoke about the vicious, almost erotic hatred that we're up against. Mr. Honlein, again, spoke about this incredible campaign of delegitimization, which, by the way, I think also has to do with legitimate people like CNN. I think it's time for Israel to try something radical, something extreme. Let me give you a few examples. Why don't we act as if we care about the Palestinians who live in Jordan and Lebanon and who are in an incredibly worse situation than the Palestinians who live in Judea and Samaria and Gaza? Why don't we act as if we care about the genocides that are happening right now in Sudan? Why don't we look at Israel as a Zionist spring that can help the rest of the Middle East? That all the lessons that Israel has learned over the past 64 years can be used to create a Middle East spring. So I'd love to see a shocking new dialogue where instead of playing defense like Mr. Pinkas said, where the problem with defense is you just sort of justifying why you exist. And no matter how good you are at defending yourself, you're still coming up to the surface to saying, I have the right to exist. The whole idea of I have the right to exist is a very lame sort of, it's not a strong argument. Israel is such an amazing, miraculous country, however imperfect, despite all its flaws. It's got so many great things that it can shock the world with. And I would love to see a whole new dialogue new vocabulary, a new way. I'd like to see Israel expose the hypocrisy of the United Nations, which, by the way, we've started to do in the last couple of years. It's a new way of looking at Israel. Instead of defending ourselves, but to position us, rather than the curse of the Middle East, we're actually the cure to the Middle East.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take as many questions as we can. Can we turn up the lights so we can see our... please ask questions, don't make statements, and keep them concise. Give your name, and if you're there specifically for someone or for the group. Okay.
Is this on?
Yes.
Okay. My name's Tom. Fantastic symposium today. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm a non-Jew American citizen, strong supporter of Israel, and I have a question.
All right.
And it's just a question. In terms of the spectrum of ideologies that are being used to delegitimize Israel, and in terms of going on the offensive, I'm always confused why Israelis don't focus on, in terms of the delegitimization in the Arab Muslim world, on the role of Islam in Sharia, in jihad. I always wondered, do Israelis study Islam or Sharia just to understand the ideology, why Muslims aren't allowed to like you or acknowledge your existence? And they're inspired by the ideology. I mean, it's coming emotionally, but they have this ideology in Islam. I don't hear that spoken about. And any comments?
Anyone want to feel that?
Absolutely. You're right. Absolutely true.
Well, I don't think it's right. Let me explain why.
What's not right? I'm sorry.
What's not right to focus on Islam? Islam is like Judaism. There are wonderful aspects of it, and there are god-awful aspects of it. The worst anti-Semites in the world know how to cull through the Talmud and the Mishnah and find some of the worst aspects of any kind of humanity in Jewish sources. And when we do that, when they do that to us, we have a name for it. We call it anti-Semitism. We should not be culling through the worst aspects of Islam and finding things in Islam that we can point to that are bigoted. We should look at what is happening in fact, what actions are being taken against the Jewish people or against the Israeli government, but we should not become anti-Muslim bigots. And I want to applaud the Anti-Defamation League of the B'nai B'rith for leading the campaign against Islamophobia and against extreme bigotry regarding Islam. We cannot get into the gutter. We have to impose on ourselves the highest standards of fairness and criticism, and do not succumb to kind of selective quotations that have historically been used against us.
I encourage you to study the Sharia. That's not true.
Okay, thank you. Can we take the next question?
Can I just
Sure.
add to that? I respectfully disagree with you, because I think that you have totally missed the point of this question, and the question is a legitimate one. There are many books out there on the history of Islam, the history of the Islamic religion, and we are totally ignorant of these, of the basis of this religion. We speak in generalities about a religion of peace, and I've been reading book after book after book about Islam. There are certain basic things that there's nothing that the Israeli government can do ever to appease radical Islam. Absolutely nothing.
So how would you like if somebody got up and said, I have been studying all the books about Judaism. I've gone back to the 11th century and the 12th century, and let me tell you, if you really read the Talmud carefully, you'll find that there is a double standard that applies between Jewish life and non-Jewish life. I don't want to even get into it because it's so despicable.
But who's using that in practice?
It's not equivalent.
It's
a
not
false analogy.
equivalent.
Not what the Talmud says. It's
It's
the
a
misuse
false
of the Talmud.
analogy.
Both.
It's
So
a
why
false
justify it?
analogy.
First of all, it's not the misuse of the Talmud. What we've done is we, fortunately, those of us who are more secular and those of us who are moderate in their religious beliefs, have relegated the worst aspects of the Talmud, and there are plenty of them, to the dustbin of history. And it is appropriate to criticize those within Islam who have not relegated the worst elements of Islam to the dustbins of history. Every single religion, Christianity, not only Catholicism, but Lutheranism,
It's moral relativism.
all
Moral
have
relativism.
these elements
Yes,
to
but
them.
they're
It is
acting
an
on it.
absolute dead end to start probing the writings of Islam. Let's focus on the actions of those who misuse Islam rather than becoming experts in an anachronistic philosophy, some of which is being used against us. Our problem is not what's written in the books of Islam. Our problem is what is carried in the pockets of Islamic terrorists and on the shoes of Islamic
Which is
terrorists.
the Quran, the Hadith, and the example of
So
Muhammad.
I
That's
don't want to
what's in their
become
pocket.
part of any
Okay.
kind
Know
of
the enemy.
Thank you, Tom.
anti-religious
Know
bigotry.
your enemy. Know
David,
your
you wanna
enemy. That's all I can say. Know who you're dealing with.
And know
know
yourself.
the
Can I
truth.
just say,
and don't
I
be
think,
blinded. That's all.
I think that what Alan is saying is we have limited resources, limited time. We're not going to get into a match in bigotry. That's not the interest. I do think that there is an answer to you, and that is showing what is happening to Christians, to anti-Muslims in Egypt, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Iran. Tell the world what they're doing and why they justify and why they're doing it.
I agree.
Okay, next question.
Karen Stoldan. I'd like to ask Malcolm Hoenlein and Alan Dershowitz and anyone else there's time for, where do we draw the line? You said that Jews and Israelis are using the language of our enemies to delegitimize Israel, and they're adopting their tactics, the identical tactics, and they're being invited into synagogues to speak, and they're talking about BDS and promoting BDS, and they're marching this year in the Israel Day Parade, groups that promote BDS, active. So the question is, where do we draw the line between people using the identical language as our enemies? How and where do we draw the line between them and our friends?
I don't understand the question.
Go ahead.
Well, first of all, the question is who draws lines? Who runs the Israel parade? I certainly would not object to organizations that I disagree with marching in the Israel parade. I don't agree fundamentally with B'Tselem's attitudes. I find some of their philosophies and some of their reports useful, but I wouldn't ban them. I wouldn't ban the New Israel Fund. I wouldn't ban Peter Beinart. I wouldn't ban a range of other people with whom I disagree. We are a very diverse community. By the way, I wouldn't have banned Meir Kahane. Remember, I was the first, quote, prominent Jew who was prepared to debate Meir Kahane. I represented Meir Kahane when they tried to ban him at Brandeis University. The Jewish umbrella is a very, very wide one. The Jewish tent is a very large one, and I don't want to be in the business of banning people. I want to be in the business of answering them. I want to be in the business of responding to bad speech with good speech. I don't want to become a censor, so I question the premise of your point about drawing lines. I think we have to draw lines in terms of responding, answering. Censorship is not the answer. Banning people is not the answer. This is a big problem. Hillel, for example, wants to be an umbrella group for all Jews on campus. And the idea that Hillel should say to some people, because they might support Beinart's view of a boycott of West Bank products, that they can't go and have a kosher meal at Hillel would be absolutely unacceptable. We have to not rely on censorship, but rather rely on better ideas, more writing, more speaking, more opportunities to respond. The truth's on our side. We can win the debate. Censorship is the worst sign of weakness.
So where is the line between allowing the language of our enemies? How do you know who is our friend and who is our enemy when they're using identical language and identical tactics?
Well, you know, everybody picks their own enemies differently. I got an email today from somebody in this audience calling my comments this morning disgraceful and unsophisticated because they claimed I tried to silence those who were booing the president. So there are people here who regard me as an enemy. I have been attacked from the right and the left. Let the debate go forward. We don't have to define who our friends or who our enemies are institutionally. We can decide who to respond to. And we respond, as I think Malcolm pointed out, by making sure we understand our priorities. going after the worst first.
Okay, thanks. Let's go on to the next question. Thank you.
Michael Cross. The Israeli universities are becoming not only centers of BDS, but actually centers of treason and sedition. And yet they continue to be funded. People like Neve Gordon, Oren Yiftachel, Flick, Shlomo Sands are being funded partly by the government and partly by the American and other foreign support groups. Nobody is doing anything about it. What does the panel think we need to do with people who are effectively working for the destruction of the Jewish state?
Oh, I have one answer. The way I deal with people who are on the far left and who claim to be ultra-liberal is I expose them as not being real liberals. Their hatred for Israel has no corresponding love for the Palestinians and for our enemies. And I think here, there's an opportunity for Israel to try to become a light unto the world and a light unto the nations. And I know it's a radical thought, but sometimes the best thing you can do is not show anger. I share a lot of the anger and the frustration and the sense of betrayal by a lot of people who do bash Israel. I do. But I really find that there's an opportunity, because the minute you show that anger, you sort of lose the battle and you go into the gutter, like I heard somebody say. And the truth is on our side. And we have to out-liberal the liberals. We got to look like we care for the 400 million Arabs and Muslims who are suffering in the Middle East, for the women who are being oppressed, for the gays who are being oppressed, for the poets who are being jailed because of the things they are saying. And we shouldn't even look like we care. We should really care and take such a high ground and such a high road that will shock the world and put the truth really on our side.
Okay, I'm sorry, this is our last question. I'm sorry, everyone. We have to finish, so go ahead.
Excuse me, I just have to respond. One point, though. The one thing we should not do is fire them, censor them, imprison them. We must answer them. Academic freedom must prevail. Now, and if you start attacking the left, there will be attacks on the extreme right. It's just not the answer on university campuses to start imposing rules as to what statements can and can't be made. And I know that may be an unpopular view, but think hard before you call for censorship or reduction of academic freedom. That would be a terrible thing to do.
But people are free to support institutions that they want, that they agree with. They're free to withhold support from institutions with which they disagree. There are many ways, short of open campaigns of censorship, of expressing yourselves on either side and to take the appropriate actions and keep, again, you know...
And there's a word for that. It's called boycott and divestment. And once you start not supporting universities because Ilan Pappé or somebody else teaches at that university, it's a simple step from not supporting food co-ops because they're selling Sabra products. So be careful what you aim for. When Harvard held a conference this week, last month, on the one-state solution, which was an obnoxious, abominable conference, there were those many who called for Harvard alumni to stop contributing to Harvard. I took a very, very different view. I said the answer to that is let's have our own conference. So we had a conference 2 or 3 weeks later on Israel's contributions to the world. It was an extraordinary success, much more successful. And you don't hold Harvard responsible for a conference that was sponsored by a group of students any more than you hold Tel Aviv University responsible for having given tenure to a mathematician who happens to be a brilliant mathematician and a stupid idiot when it comes to issues of politics. So, although I generally agree with Malcolm, I think the idea, don't jump so quickly to withhold support from universities that don't fire academics with whom you disagree. The implications of that can be quite serious and can lead to a justification for boycott, divestments, and sanctions.
I say that I think the key word here is seichel. It's a question of using intelligence. I'm not calling for boycotts because we oppose boycotts, but I said if individuals have a desire to express themselves, they have a right to do that.
Absolutely.
I think the key is we did this very intensive study, and I'll take 1 second. but the most intensive ever done of the American people. We studied every segment, every part, in depth for a year. Never was any study like this done. Not a poll, but in-depth study to really understand what motivates people, what directs them. The fact is that all of these things are marginal to what impacts the vast majority that we are looking for. We have 25% hardcore support and 10% hardcore opposition. We're not going to change the opposition. The hardcore support is with us. The fight is over the middle. And the middle moves towards indifference. And they're not going to be. Those who hate us are going to use all of the negative guys and regurgitate it and use it. The fact is that the battle takes place in the middle. And that's where we have to focus our efforts with positive messages, with telling the story of Israel, with reaching out, with telling and to counter. It doesn't mean you ignore those who fight us and oppose us. You try to deal with that, but at the same time you look at this other track. We have the resources to do both, but it takes everybody to be part of this. And it means that we have to have the whole panoply of the Jewish community involved so that people can relate to it and people can use all of our resources to fight those who want to do us harm and who want to really destroy the state of Israel.
Okay. Thank you very much. I apologize for the short time. I want to thank all our panelists and thank all of you for staying to the end. And over to Steve.